it's going to be, you will be hard pressed to kill this Mundo in the late game.
That's true. Corki doesn't tank bust. You're not getting that.
If Grabby does not kill...
The last time Urgot was played in the LCS was January 26th of 2014. But ever since Keane's come into the LCS, he's been hinting at pulling it out. When Urgot received a huge buff in patch 5.5, that did it. Keane picked Urgot against TSM, who had just come back from winning the IAM. In last year's game, Urgot was played as a marksman in a full bruiser mid-game team composition. This time, he's played as a mid laner in a tank bruiser mid-game team composition, which the meta currently favors alongside the buff the carry composition. And these kinds of compositions are the ones that Urgot excels most at, because they make him difficult to focus, so he can safely get in range and unload consistent damage. In this video, we'll analyze Keane's mid lane Urgot playstyle, including why he does the things that he does throughout the game, and what he could have done alternatively. Urgot is an intriguing pick for mid lane because this short lane is generally home to burst champions. But Urgot deals consistent damage, which can make it difficult to finish off kills in such a short lane. So because he doesn't have much room to work with, and he's facing a squishy opponent, Keane takes Ignite against Bjergsen to try and get an advantage. Keane starts with a Crystalline Flask and 3 health potions, and he recalls before 130 and picks up a mana potion. This is the standard when starting with Crystalline Flask in top lane, because you can just walk into lane with the minion wave without missing anything. However, it can set you behind a little bit if you're in mid lane, but Gravity did something genius. Haunter threw out some saplings on the Wraith camp. Usually he might take it, recall, and teleport to 1v2 lane, but instead he left the saplings and leashed the Krugs for St. Vicious. Keane on the Urgot walked over just in time for the Wraith camp to spawn, finished the small Wraiths, and then went to mid lane with the XP advantage that allowed him to get levels 2, 3, and 4 before Bjergsen. Because of that level advantage, Keane was able to bully Bjergsen out of lane and get a 16 CS lead at 4.5 minutes. There are 3 major mastery pages that Urgot players use: 21.9, 21.5.4, and 21.09. Keane uses a defensive 21.9 page, which is much less gold efficient than the 21.5.4 page for the majority of the game, but the values go into health rather than mana and improved recall, so perhaps it's a trade-off that he's willing to make. His focus is, after all, almost on the late game, as you can see in his runes, which are almost entirely scaling except with flat AD marks and quints. And that is really strange because armor penetration runes are much more efficient on Urgot since his Q scales with total AD rather than bonus AD, so he deals more damage with armor penetration runes past level 3. Maybe he just finds it easier to CS with AD runes, which is a perfectly valid reason to use them. Notably, Keane also takes 5% scaling CDR rather than flat. This is giving up a lot in the early game because Urgot needs about 10% CDR to reliably get 3 Acid Hunters out in the duration of 1 Noxian Corrosive Charge. In return, however, he gets a lot more magic resistance in the late game. In the first fight of the game, Bjergsen underestimates Urgot and makes a bad decision. He goes all in with even less health than Keane. As long as Keane hits his abilities, there should be no way that Urgot loses this fight. Going ahead, Keane uses Hyperkinetic Position Reverser to minimize Zed's damage and forces him out. But then Keane dives a Zed with Flash after Noxian Corrosive Charge wears off, and the universe cringes. Now, Keane rushed Manamune. Urgot arguably gains more immediate power by building Brutalizer or Glacial Shroud, but Keane isn't focusing on the landing phase anymore. Instead, he wants to upgrade into Muramana as soon as possible, so he upgrades into Tier to make it stack faster. This makes sense in the mid game, especially with a Nunu in the jungle because an early Manamune can easily dominate a dragon fight. Unfortunately, because of Keane's previous mistake, he no longer had any escapes, making him easy prey to Santorin, despite having ward coverage. There honestly wasn't much that could be done. If St. Vicious got there earlier, perhaps he could have discouraged the fight, but they would have lost the 2v2 because they were outleveled and Keane's ult was down. Now here Gravity makes a pick on Mundo in top lane, but Keane gets out of position when TSM responds by pushing mid. He probably should have been under the secondary turret, but there's no telling whether that would actually have saved him. So now Urgot, the lane menace, our glorious Noxian rotting animal carcass, is 0-3 and almost 30 CS behind. What gives? Well, Urgot actually scales really well into the mid game with just his base values. And with a Manamune, Brutalizer, and Glacial Shroud, he's perfectly capable of destroying a fed Lucian. That's why Gravity is still confident in going for this fight. Keane first zones Wild Turtle, then moves in to finish Rek'Sai. When Dyrus starts teleporting right behind him, he ults Lustboy to get to safety. He doesn't swap places because he's polymorphed, but he does gain 90 armor and magic resistance, which saves him from Turtle's 2 crits and allows him to survive Zed's ditch attempt to finish him off. And then he turns it for a triple kill. So the Baron call was a bit questionable and could have easily backfired. Keane uses all of his Noxian corrosive charges on Baron, and this increases his damage by a little bit, although the armor shred doesn't affect on Baron. It was still probably the right choice in this situation, because he wouldn't have been able to delay Santorin by much, and it was probably better to finish Baron as fast as possible. So Gravity gets 3 Frozen Hearts. Its aura is somewhat short, 600 range. Gravity's team composition is all about roaming around as a team and sieging, and because of that they'll usually be close enough together. But the composition is also about something else, forcing long, broken up team fights where they break up into squads that kite around TSM. That's when the Frozen Hearts come in handy. Also, TSM's composition is almost entirely AD, so it's pretty much useful against everybody. Here, Gravity repeatedly groups up to siege mid lane even without Baron the second time. The idea is that Urgot and Corki can force members of TSM to back off with just a little poke, so even though they don't have large auto-attack ranges, they can still take the turret fairly easily. They've also got the option to catch stragglers off with Urgot's ultimate and Maokai's Twisted Advance if anyone stays too long, which TSM was smart to avoid. Now, Urgot's ultimate can be used both offensively and defensively, and Keane has an excellent opportunity to catch Lulu out with an instant flash ult here, but he chooses not to do it even though he has information that Zed is at top lane. Gravity's grouped as 5, so they could easily follow up and turn it into a free Baron. Based on this game, Keane's Urgot playstyle is very defensive. Urgot has somewhat of a mobility issue in the mid to late game. This is one of the reasons that I've always advocated using Ghost and Flash, and why Riot has as well. But Gravity is working around this by always fighting as 5 in a cluster, even by forcing fights at Baron. With Maokai picking up a Righteous Glory though, Keane's in a pretty decent spot mobility wise, unless Lustboy targets him with his Glitter Lance, which he does, 3 times. That prevents Keane from getting close enough to hit most of his abilities until the end of this fight. While Keane had many opportunities to use his ultimate this fight, he reserves it as sort of a counter for Zed. Once Bjergsen uses Deathmark, Keane hyperkinetic position reverses his scraggling ninja ass away from Cop, and Zed is completely invalidated. Keane picks up a Last Whisper next, which is a really smart purchase. When deciding between Last Whisper and Black Cleaver, consider the following. If the enemy has or will soon have 2 or more champions with 200 or more armor, get Last Whisper. If your intention is to eliminate squishies in one combo, get Last Whisper because its damage is considerably higher than Black Cleaver and the effect is immediate rather than increasing over time with stacks. The only reason that you'd pick up a Black Cleaver first is to emphasize the team-wide effect, but because Urgot can act as a long-ranged assassin with Last Whisper, there are few situations in which Black Cleaver is actually a good choice. You can study all the math going into this decision in my guide under the items section. As you can see, Gravity forced the Baron fight again, and this time they secured Urgot's long-lost cousin, the Scuttle Crab. They've got so many slows and a beastly bunny Fufu, so there's no way that Dyrus can get away. But Keane had an opportunity to flash ult Wild Turtle right before Mundo died, but again didn't go for it. Gravity stayed to safely finish Baron while TSM responded with a tower in mid lane. At this point, all Gravity needs to do is safely siege, get hooks, follow up with Corki and Urgot poke, and you've got one very dead Mundo. That's tough. Gravity wants to dive from here. Lucian's got a Quicksilver Sash, but there's no way that that's going to stop everything. Then it's a rotation from mid to top lane, and TSM makes a final attempt at a fight. This is actually a good try on TSM's part. St. Vicious wastes a lot of time at Gromp, and Zed almost gets to do something, but praise be to Urgot buffs, making that shield a hell of a big one. In closing, Keane played a very impressive Urgot, although his playstyle was somewhat one-dimensional. He played very safely and passed up a number of good opportunities. Oh, and before I forget, he maxed E second, which is pretty standard these days, now that Terra Capacitor is a 1-point wonder. In the end, Urgot was played in the LCS, and he won! Versus the IEM champions. I do look forward to our future ruled by our glorious Rodinoxian animal carcass. Woe to all solo laners who must contend with this menace.